Hello, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and before I start this video, I have the dog with me, who I will try and slowly introduce. There we go, the little boy. Up here, Bubba. He wants to get involved in this review, clearly. Come on, Bubba, up more. There we go. So hopefully he won't do this for the entire review, even though I've now kind of just goaded him into doing this. But hi, I'm Bob the Bookerer, and today... Hey, Bubba. Yeah, and today I'm going to be talking about another book from the Booker Prize Longlist. That is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I won't really, there isn't really too much to spoil as such. Hello, Pepper. So I won't necessarily have that kind of in there, but if there is anything when I'm sort of speaking that starts to feel like it might be in the spoiler territory, then I will let you know and flag that before you go, just in case you've not read the book yet. But with that in mind, let's get started talking about this book. A few years ago, I remember reading an article that spoke about a mission that was taking place, a mission that was going to be up in space where it was looking for people who basically would know that they would never return back to Earth. The whole idea is that they would take part in this mission that would take 50, 60, 70 years, and therefore, and sort of as part of this big test of kind of gathering information and doing various things and finding out more information. And it was interesting thinking about that at the time of what does it look like to go on a mission like that, to never know if you're coming home at all. Actually, particularly in that case, pretty much knowing that you won't. What does it mean? Particularly there was somebody who signed up who I think was in their 20s, and she said, I'm just really passionate and excited about being part of this big thing. And it struck me at the time that that's a very sort of specific type of person that you'd be looking for. Somebody who, at whatever age that they're signing up for it, is okay with the idea of not coming back home, and is okay with the idea that although their name may be etched in history, they never themselves get to celebrate or see that they are just doing a job that very much consumes them and involves them being away for years and years at a time. And this always sat with me as something really interesting, and I kind of can't personally picture it because that does not feel like something I can see ever in my life. Just the idea of moving cities sometimes feels a lot. And so it was sort of with that in mind that I came to a book like Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And I think this book does a really interesting job in exploring ideas around something like this. We have in the book 6 characters who are in space looking down on Earth, and they're part of sort of various missions to do with sort of gathering information and doing much the same. In some ways their stories are slightly different. They have a sense of potentially coming back home, but equally it still probes at that very odd idea of what it means to very literally uproot yourself and kind of go and be somewhere else, and the idea of never quite knowing how to return home or to do whatever. You can never be part of something normal again. You have a brand new normal that's created for you in the space station or in the kind of, in sort of the traveling vessel in space, but you're never quite there in something. You're never, you can't just kind of casually pop back for a friend's wedding or, do whatever. You are there. Your job and life are entirely all-consuming with this idea of being in space and doing everything. And Samantha Harvey's book, I think, explores this so interestingly because it's a very spare and lyrical book. It doesn't interject too much with kind of a narrative voice in the same way. We sort of just meander through characters' thoughts. And I think it's more effective for that reason, because the book just sort of drifts in a way like this thing orbiting the Earth. And the book is sort of set in this time frame of one sort of orbit, and sort of watching as things go round. And it's curious to think about this as you're reading the book, that this is just a thing that is in many ways likely happening above your head to some degree at this very moment. And I think the book does something really quite special with it. It could be incredibly flighty and, over the top or whatever else. And I think this book has a really tight control over this narrative. It doesn't feel like words are wasted. It's an incredibly short book, but it feels like that's been cut down to the bone to really focus on the exact thoughts and sort of pieces of this moving story and kind of moving sort of orbit that the characters are caught up in. And it's interesting because this book was also shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for political fiction. And at first it doesn't seem like a book that's deeply political, and in some ways you have to sort of look at it again. And actually, when I was sort of thinking about it through the lens of the Orwell Prize, it did get me thinking that there's something about the way that this book not only deals with geopolitics in terms of the various nations represented within the book, but there's something about the idea of looking down at humanity and trying to understand humankind through the lens of this operation that shows more than just this. That the plot doesn't really necessarily matter as much in the book. It's not about that. It's kind of about this feeling of detachment and how so many things that we see as sort of typical normal behavior feel quite bizarre when they're looked down upon from space. It's that very kind of famous thing. I think maybe Buzz Aldrin, I might be getting this entirely wrong, but this typical thing that often happens when people go to space and then come back is they say that this idea of, you are looking down on Earth and all you see is this spinning planet, and it becomes foolish to think about things like war or conflict or anything else like that, because from afar, this is just a tiny dot of some things happening. And who are these even tinier dots kind of to think that they are important enough to have these grand conflicts with each other? And the book also reminds me a little bit of a long-listed book from last year, In Ascension, by Martin McInnes. And I was at a book club recently where we were talking about In Ascension, and it got me thinking a little bit more about some of the themes in this book, the ways that in that book, sort of both undersea and sort of in space, the wider politics of the space race or of building spaceships also comes into play. The idea that for these nations to be represented in space also requires them to put a lot of money behind it. There's often a sense of competition between these nations to embark on something so big and costly and epic, and to do so also with a view of kind of understanding humanity slightly better in a way that feels very peace-loving and unified, but also has an element of sort of national strategy. And so there's something in this book that's sort of hidden beneath the surface, I think, that also deals with that. The fact that this would have been very easy as a book to have all of the characters be from the same nations or the same kind of class or kind of backgrounds or whatever. And the book does something in here that I think is quite interesting by both elevating some of their personal stories, but also kind of hiding that behind something else that, ultimately this process of being in orbit is the great equalizer for them. There's nothing more or less about them because it doesn't matter if they've got someone back home or not. In that moment, they are in this world and this specific job. And I think the book does something really clever here about allowing both a real foregrounding of personal experience, but also snatching that away at various points. We get little insights into somebody thinking about a child or somebody thinking about a partner or what have you. But equally, at the same time, these characters are just using those as lenses to look at the world, the wider world. And sometimes they understand it and sometimes they don't. And I think that's what's so interesting here with the book is it allows this space, pun unintended, for those discussions and conversations to happen. This is a book that exists in the spaces and the silences in between things. There's a lot of nothing for the characters. There's a lot of dead time or there's a lot of physical space to be looking out on. And again, it's so difficult to do this without making that unintentional pun about space. But there's all this room that they are seeing between themselves and Earth. And suddenly to feel like this tiny little fleck in the universe is something so poignant for them, particularly as they come from these different nations that on Earth might have these slightly different interactions with each other. So yeah, I just thought it was a really beautiful and spare book. And it's something that I really want to return to again. I think it has a kind of haunting quality. And so in some ways I wouldn't be surprised if it made the shortlist, just because I think on a second read it might do something slightly different. Yeah, an interesting little book, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear kind of how everybody else took to it, because I just think it's really special in what it does here. I've been Bob the Booker. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.